Welcome to I Put It To You, the podcast where we put the questions on the table, we unpack the facts and get real about the things that you really want to know. Joining me today in the hot seat is one of our directors, Eduan Human. He's our commercial and property director. He's the last guy you will see in court. Welcome, Eduan. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Cecilia. Awesome to be here.
I also had the opportunity to work under Eduan's guidance for a year. And I must mention to the listeners, Eduan is like our most educated director here.
Educated is a big word, but okay.
Eduan has an advanced taxation diploma. He's a conveyancer. He's a business rescue practitioner. And you have an advanced diploma in deceased estate administration.
Yeah, trust in the deceased estate administration.
So Eduan, he knows a thing or two. So get comfortable. We're going to talk about buying your property in a trust or a company. We're going to chime in a bit about buying property as an individual and what Eduan would recommend. So get comfortable, get your coffee, and let's get going.
Good.
Eduan, I put it to you. What is a trust? Describe for the layman out there, what is the difference between a trust and a company?
Okay, so the question of explaining to the layman makes it very difficult, because asking the question of what is a trust is, you can't answer that without being too complicated. But you also can't be too straightforward about it. And important is, if you answer that question correctly, what is a trust, then you understand trust. Then you don't have to ask any questions again, all the taxes make sense. But in short, what it comes down to, a trust is not you. Okay. So a trust is not a juristic person, it's not you, it's something in the middle. It's a contract between someone that starts a trust and another person that runs the trust, to the benefit of a third person that gets whatever is in the trust. So it's a bit of a grey area, and that's what makes trust nice. But it is something that's not you. Yes. And I think that's an important start point.
A trust compared to a company, private company, I want to register a private company. What is a company, private company?
So a company is a juristic person. So that is registering something with legal personality. So that's like literally registering a person that can own a property. So you do that at the CIPC, company has a name and a registration number, where a trust is similar to a company in the sense that it is also a separate, let's call it a separate, it stands separate from your personal assets or from what you are, but it is not a juristic person, and that's where the benefits of the trust come in, where we'll get to. But in short, for purposes of buying a company, a trust is, the big difference between it is a company has shareholders, which owns the shares, and the trust has beneficiaries that can maybe accept or receive a benefit from it.
So let's take the trust. If I have to explain to somebody, they come to me, they say, Cecilia, I want a trust. What am I going to explain to them? What's the process? Because you mentioned the CIPC for the company. We know that a company needs to be registered with the CIPC. We get the registration number and the shareholders, all that extra stuff, the shareholders, the memorandum of incorporation, all that stuff that goes with a company. You can get the basic ones on CIPC, but the trust, how do we register that? We don't do that on the CIPC.
No, you don't do it at the CIPC, you do it at the master's office. So you register a trust at the master's office, and the documents that's important is the letter of authority and the trust deed. So the letter of authority says who the trustees are that'll run the trust and make the decisions, and the trust deed is the rules of the trust. That's the contract between the trustees to say what the trustees may and may not do.
So we get the letter of authority from the master of the High Court. And previously, I spoke to another colleague of ours, Lizanne, and we also spoke about the master the whole time. It goes to the same place. The master is just the place in, let's say, Bloemfontein. These documents get sent to, and the master sends us back the letter of authority and so forth. But before we can get that letter of authority, what documents would you require if somebody tells you, Eduan, I need a trust and I need a company? What's the most important documents that you require from the individual to be able to do your work and set up the trust before sending it off and getting the letter of authority?
So from a document perspective, it comes down to exactly the same documents as you'll need for anything in a law office. You'll need IDs, you'll need proof of addresses, and then you'll need a name for the trust. So the difference, I would say, between a trust and a company is a company, you walk in, you say you want a company, here's the names of the directors, here's the names of the shareholders, copy of the IDs, Bob's your uncle, and go ahead. With the trust, I think the documents that you need are the same, but the important part is the discussion on how the trust will be set up. So it is very, very important to not see a trust as a plug and play of send me the documents and Bob's your uncle, we're going to go ahead. I would almost want to use the word the discussion is just as important as the documents.
Yes,
that makes sense?
I would agree. You spoke briefly now about the structure of a company, it's the shareholders, but the trust, we have somebody known as the founder, and who's all the parties involved there? There's one specific person always involved in the trust that's very important.
Yeah, so this is where the discussion comes into what a trust is and what type of trust you get and so on. As you get a company, yes, you get a private company, you get a personal liability company, you get a non-profit company, but 99% of the time when we talk about a company, we talk about a private company. A trust can be either a inter vivos trust, it could be a testamentary trust, it could be a discretionary trust, a vested trust. So there's a few kinds of trust that you can do. And all of those have different parties. But if we talk about the general, similar parties, but different roles that they play. But if we talk about if someone walks into your office and say, I want a family trust, then most of the time it's an inter vivos trust and it's a discretionary trust. And the parties that play a role in that scenario is the founder. So the founder is the individual that starts the trust. So it's the founder's idea to create the trust. And the trustees are the second party, so those are the individuals that run the trust, and then you get the beneficiaries. So they don't have any say, but they get the benefit out of the trust. And then one of the very important role players is, in some cases, let's call it most cases, an independent trustee is necessary. So
why is that necessary? Because a lot of people will approach us and say, no, it will be me and my wife and my sister and that's it. I don't want anybody else. Why is it so important to have an independent trustee appointed?
So the commercial attorney into me wants to run away with this question and get very technical, but I know that's not what we want to do here. So to break it down to the bare essentials, there was a court case a while ago, a few years ago actually, that said the master proposes, or the court proposes, that there should be an independent trustee if it's a family, I think it's a family business trust is the wording that we use.
In the document you always fill in it, you tick the family business.
And then the master's office decided that is now law. So that's not technically true, but in order to register a trust, the master is going to require it in those circumstances. And the idea behind it is it's someone independent that's not a beneficiary and not a family or a friend of any of the trustees of a beneficiary that can make sure that this trust is run properly and that the rules are followed. Because you can just imagine, previously when trusts were just used for tax purposes, which I think those days are gone, but in those days, one individual was the founder, they ran the trust as the trustee and the beneficiary. So the independent trustee just keeps the lines a bit tighter.
Independent governance.
Independent governance, so that's practically what the reason is for it.
What's some of the basics now. Let's forget about that. When you are investing in property in South Africa right now, how do you decide whether you should use a trust or a company to buy in property?
So there's 2 or 3 main reasons of why you would like either a trust or a company. We can get into that a bit later. But if your answer is, I heard that I saved tax by having something in a trust, that's the wrong answer. That's not why we want a trust. Yes, if you structure it correctly, there'll be a few benefits of it, but that's not the reason. So the first important correct reason is to leave a legacy for your family. In other words, you want to put something in a trust for your kids one day, so because you pass away. Your trust doesn't. And the trustees have a duty to look after your kids. So typically, if I say I want to buy a property and my kids are too young, but I want to leave it for a legacy for my family and for them, I can put it into a trust, and the trust will protect that property for future generations.
Yeah.
So that's the first reason. The second reason, which is becoming the more common reason, also I think a very important reason, is to keep the property safe from creditors.
Yeah.
So in other words, I'm a lawyer at a law firm. Any law firm must be a personal liability company. So all lawyers are personally liable for the debts of the company.
Yeah.
So if the company gets sued, the director's assets can be attached. When you're in a construction business, typically you would have signed surety with all your suppliers, and then you want the property safe. So if the structure was set up correctly and the property is registered in a trust, that the property will always be safe. So I always explain it to say, you shouldn't have your business expose your personal assets for your family. So that's to keep it safe. So that's the second reason. The third reason is estate duty. So if you pass away, if you meet certain thresholds and the estate is worth a certain value, then you pay estate duty. And if it is in a trust, the assets, then there won't be any estate duty on that portion.
Yes.
If there's no loan accounts, and there's 20 other things that we can think about. But yeah, that's the third reason. And importantly, you will note we didn't mention income tax here.
Yeah. And a company, you spoke about the trust now. How about a company?
Yeah. So the first part is a trust, because to answer the question about a company, you've got to answer one more question about a trust. And a trust is set up in a discretionary way.
Yes.
So the trustees have the discretion on how to split the income or the capital in the trust throughout the beneficiaries. A company doesn't have any discretion. So the company has a shareholder which owns a percentage of the shares. So if I set up a company for you, Cecilia, you will typically be the 100% shareholder.
Yeah.
That means if you pass away, even though the assets won't fall in your estate, the shares will fall in your estate.
In your estate, okay.
So that's the big difference between a company and a trust, and obviously the taxes work different, and the whole structure of it works different, and the rules behind a company and a trust work completely different. So, but to put it in a one-liner, the shareholding is different to the benefits of being a beneficiary of the trust. I hope that doesn't overcomplicate it.
No, it kind of answered the questions that I want to know, because my next question would have been, what's the difference between holding the property in a trust versus a company? And you answered that now. For a trust, it completely falls out of your estate, where if I had a company, the shareholding is in my name, and we need to stress this for the people, because our whole goal of each and every episode is to equip the people. So now I, in my personal capacity, would know, after looking at this and listening to what you say, is I would much rather than do the trust, because what if I had a few million, then that doesn't form part of my estate. So that's just very, very important. To stress that.
Yeah, that is very important, but that's not always the whole story. Okay, because obviously there's nothing wrong with registering a company, but having the shares of that company fall within a trust.
Yeah.
So then you get the same benefits, and then you've got to have a look at the more technical side of the differences between a company and a trust.
But if we want to keep it basic, not technical, the average guy.
Yeah. So the big difference of the question that gets asked is then it becomes a question of two big things. The first part is, what is actually the difference from a tax perspective? And if we say estate duty is the same if you have the shares in a of the company in a trust versus directly in a trust, then you've got no other way but to start looking at the income taxes. So that's the first question. So the income tax in a company is a bit less than in a trust. So a trust is 45% and a company, I think, is 27%. Also not the full story, because any profits in a company, dividends will be paid out, and then there's dividends tax on it. And a trust also, you can if you don't keep the money or the income of the property in the trust and you start to hand it out to the beneficiaries, then the beneficiaries will pay the taxes on it.
Yeah.
So income tax is the one big question that you've got to answer. And the second part is the rules about how a trust is run and how a company is run. Is very important because it's completely different. And the easiest way to give an example is the Companies Act, I think is 300 pages, and the Trust Property Control
24.
Act, I think is 24 pages. So that just tells you
Yeah.
a trust is much, from a legislative perspective, is much less regulated. But being less regulated doesn't make it less complicated.
Yes.
You actually, because specifically because trust was such a grey area, SARS started looking at trust much stricter than, I don't want to say much stricter, but stricter than a company.
If
and people
we
don't
think 20 years ago, it's not the same
It's not
20
the
years
same,
ago as
yeah.
it is today. How do long-term investment goals influence the choice between a trust and a company? You're going to buy this property, you intend to keep it for 30 years. So how does that influence it?
It all depends on what your plans are with that property for future generations and how you would use the property. In other words, would you just lease the property or won't the property earn an income? Because it's right here that I want to start talking about owning the property in your personal capacity as well.
Yes.
Because on the long term, that's going to make a difference. Because the immediate thought that I'm getting is if you plan to hold a property for 30 years and only sell it then when you retire, let's use your primary residence as an example, the house that I live in. I bought it now, I'm going to stay at the Beer Claassen until I'm 65 and then I'm going to sell it. So hopefully it'll increase in value quite a bit.
Yeah.
And you get much more tax benefits
In your
on
personal
capital
capacity.
gains tax in your personal capacity. So the first question that you've got to ask is that portion. So 99.9% of the times it'll be to your benefit if it's a primary residence to rather have it in your personal name.
Okay.
But where did we start this discussion? This is not about taxes, right? So if we say you are a high risk individual,
Yes.
then you should start forgetting about taxes. And focus on keeping your assets safe.
Yeah.
And then it becomes a discussion of having it either in a company or a trust. And I would always say we're leaning in a direction where it's starting to get more beneficial to have it in a company because the running of a company has clearer rules. We understand companies better than we understand trusts. So for the long term, look at your risk.
Yeah.
And if there's low risk, probably your personal name, your first property,
Yeah.
second and third properties, we'll start looking at a company with the shares in a trust or otherwise directly in a trust. And the decision between the two of those is a more complicated discussion, but 85% of the time, it's a question about if you're planning to have 5 or 6 properties,
Yeah.
it's probably going to be better to have a look at a company than having a look at a trust.
Okay. But then we go to the technical side of then the shareholding we need to sort out.
Yeah.
To rather put the shares in the trust. What is the legal requirements that must be met for a trust or a company when they are purchasing property?
Okay, so there's 2 big things. And now we're not talking about secondary matters. We're talking about the primary things. When you walk into a lawyer's office,
Yeah.
that's what needs to be in place.
Yeah.
The first part is a resolution. So with a company, there must be a resolution of the directors, or if they sell the property and it's the only property, there needs to be a resolution of the shareholders as well.
Yes.
And if it's in a trust, there needs to be a resolution by the trustees. So in other words, one trustee can't make the decision on its own. There must be a resolution. And the second part is the trust deed with the trust or the MOI, the company, if it's a company, must allow the buying and selling of properties. So your trust deed must say the trustees are allowed to buy property. If it doesn't say that, you can't buy or sell properties. So lesson learned in the middle of the discussion, you need to know what's in your trust deed.
How important is your annual financial statements?
in order to buy or sell the property,
Yeah.
not from a compliance perspective. In other words, a lawyer, before they transfer the property, or estate agent, before they help you, will probably not ask for the annual financial statements. But if you don't have financial statements in a company or a trust, then you shouldn't have a company or a trust. So, because that's what it comes down to. If you don't understand how a company or a trust works, don't have one. And I mean, financial statements is not even a discussion. So that before you even talk to a lawyer about a transfer of a property, your financial statements need to be in order.
It always needs to be in order. We touched on capital gains tax a bit, and this isn't any tax advice or anything. So how does the capital gains tax differ from trusts and companies? We spoke a bit about in your personal capacity. How does that differ from trust to companies?
So the important part is not one of them as the primary residence exclusion, and a trust and a company both have an inclusion rate of 80%. So to explain that as easy as I can is, whatever profits you make on the property, let's say you bought it for 1 million, you sell it for 2 million, both the company and the trust, 80% of that gain is included in your taxable income. So there it's the same, but the taxable income between a company and a trust differs. A company is 27%, a trust is 45%, but as I said, in a trust you can move the funds to the beneficiaries. What we must just remember, if the money lies with the beneficiaries, then all of a sudden you've basically missed the whole purpose of all of this, because then you pay estate duty of whatever's in your personal name, and then with a company there's dividends tax payable if you want to pay it out. But if you keep it in the company, the tax might be a little bit less.
We talk a bit about the advantages of placing your property in the trust and so forth, that it doesn't fall part of your estate duty whenever you pass away. What's the disadvantages? Is there any disadvantages people should know about when you place your property in a trust or in a company?
Admin and costs.
Admin and costs.
If you're not good at admin, or you don't have a very, very good accountant to help you with the admin, don't do the trust. Don't do a company. The administrative burden of it is quite a bit. It's to have financial statements firstly, but secondly, you can't just have financial statements. The financial statements need to be correct. There needs to be resolutions in place, and all of this costs money. So it becomes a figure principle, because you can always get a good accountant or a PA to help you with the admin and get around the admin, but all of that will cost money, and it doesn't help you. The costs of the admin of a trust or a company becomes more than the benefit that we have. So that's the downside of it. And also, except for the admin, is if you or your accountant don't understand how the trust typically works, what we see a lot is people put their property in a trust or a company, but they forget about the loan account. And then when they pass, and we can get into that if we want to, but if the loan account still exists, then the loan account falls within your estate. Or when you maybe declare bankruptcy, your loan account can be attached.
But your loan account, you can state that in your will. You can say that your loan account against the trust goes to whoever.
You can put it in your will, but the will is step 3. So the will only starts to play a role after you've actually dealt with the estate. So you've already paid the taxes, and you've already paid or dealt with the risks in the estate. So the will helps, but it's not the solution. So you've got to administer that trust in the loan account perfectly.
Let's say now your assets is in a trust or a company, but you do not comply with certain rules and regulations. In the last couple of years, we refer to it as BO, the beneficial ownership. What can happen with the trust if you do not comply with the beneficial ownership of the trust? It comes back to the disadvantage of the administration of the trust. But what can happen if you do not comply? What happens? Is there an impact? Firstly, trust, if you do not comply with the rules and regulations, and a company. What can happen? Like if it doesn't impact the financial statements, doesn't impact buying or selling really the property. But I think we need to stress on the beneficial ownership and the administration of a trust if you do not comply.
Yeah. So let's go one step back. What is beneficial ownership and why did it come into play? So beneficial ownership is when South Africa was grey listed and all the FICA requirements became stricter and stricter and stricter, the South African government needed to do a few things to make sure the country is a bit more above board and that we're less exposed to fraud, basically.
To the best of our ability.
To the best of our ability, okay. But what they did is they said, you've now got to lodge a register at the master with the trust or the CIPC with the company to show who is the actual owner of the company or the trust. In other words, to say who's the warm body behind all of this. We understand it's in a trust, but who actually benefits from it?
Yeah.
So that's the reason why. So it isn't a principle that was created by trust law, company law, although it was included in those legislation. So you can get a fine. That's the first question. So if you talk about compliance directly, a company can eventually get deregistered, but the fine is the big issue there. But the second portion of that question is, if you don't have the beneficial ownership in order and none of that is clear, that means probably there's other mistakes as well. Because why wouldn't you do the beneficial ownership except you just didn't get around to it? And there's such a nice word in trust law that they talk about a sham trust. To say, if you deal with a trust as if it's your personal assets,
that's what they did 23 years ago.
That's what they did always.
Trusts.
Okay, so we can get very technical and let's not do that now. We can say that for a later discussion. But the principle it comes down to is a trust, if it's a sham trust, will be declared to not actually have ever been a valid trust. So then the trust can be declared invalid. And let's just talk about, this is so interesting for me because trust always get created by businessmen, and always the most clever of businessmen always used to be, or the most creative rather, is the farming community. The farmers always had created a brilliant structure, and then there's one or two ways, or examples of where the trust actually gets looked at. And the one is once SARS come digging, and the second part is my old favorite, the divorce. Because no one ever has money to litigate until they get divorced. Then there's money to litigate. And that's when the spouse will maybe come have a look and see all these assets that
don't say husband.
That's what I want to be cautious of here.
One of the two
one of the two spouses. Okay. So when one of the two spouses actually hid assets in a trust, the other spouse will try and declare the trust as a sham trust. So I know the question started with beneficial ownership, and this is what I'm getting at. So if your ex-spouse has to go to court and show why this trust was a sham and not really a trust, what's the first thing that they will use? Beneficial ownership. Because if you didn't lodge your beneficial ownership, are you trying to hide something? What's going on here? Second part they'll have a look at is, do you have financial statements? Third part they'll look at is, was there ever meetings and those kind of things. So what can happen if your beneficial ownership or your compliance is not in order? One, you can get a fine. Let's make it easy.
How big is that fine? Because the one thing people always say is, hoeveel? How much must I pay?
Hoeveel? Now, we'll have to go have a look at it, what the latest penalties are. I don't think that has been in court. There will be guidelines on it. Let's arrange a second podcast to dig into deep on that.
The master should also, and not like anybody at the master will probably watch this, but they need to sort out the Excel spreadsheet. That's all I'm saying about beneficial ownership. Eduan, thank you for joining me. Is there anything, we touched on quite a bit in our discussion now, is there anything, if I have to tell you, Eduan, tell me now, is there something you want the people to know, whether buying in a trust or company or individual name, the most important thing that you want to tell the people?
So there is something very important, and that's, I know we overcomplicated it a little bit, and probably after this you'll still don't know what's the difference between a trust and a company.
It's not complicated with Eduan.
But there's a very good reason why I try to do it that way, and that is, you should understand the technicalities of what it is. I could have answered and said, the big difference is if it's in a trust, it's not in your estate.
Yeah.
But that wouldn't have been the full truth.
Yeah.
So I think the first important message I want to get across is you cannot decide on whether you want a trust or a company without a proper discussion. The discussion that you have with your lawyer or your accountant for an hour or two before you make the decision, that's more important than what you do. You should actually understand the details of it. That's the first important part. But the second important part I want to say is, if anyone tells you do not get a trust or a company because SARS is very strict on it, that's not the answer. Not much has changed on the rules. The only thing that changed is people understand the rules better, and SARS and the courts look at more detail in these kind of things. So don't be scared of a trust. Don't be scared of a company. 99% of the time, a trust or a company would make sense if it's not your first property.
Yeah.
But just understand what it means and how it should be dealt with.
But if it's your first property and you're like a director who needs to keep your property safe, it does also make sense just to move it out of your name or put it in your wife's name.
Or don't put it in your wife's name. Don't do that. So so I think that, to summarize quite a long discussion, I think the answer is probably if you're an individual with a low risk job, as in you're a salary earning individual without any business exposure, and you're buying your first property, the answer would 99% of the time be buy it in your personal name. If you're going to buy a second property, maybe still buy it in your personal name. Just make sure your life policies are in order. When we're starting to get it at a third or fourth property, or with plans to get a third or fourth property, then it's important to start looking at a trust or a company. And if you are exposed to high risk, you can't put a price to it. You need to protect your house that you just bought for your family. So if you're a high risk individual, then it's almost always worth it to start looking at a trust or company.
Very, very informative. Thank you so much, Eduan. Before I end the episode, I always ask the people a couple of rapid fire questions. So don't think about it, just answer it.
Yeah.
Trust or company, if you have to choose one for the rest of your career, which one would you work with?
Company with the shares in a trust.
Biggest mistake investors make in their property structures?
Not having their admin in order.
Okay. Buy, hold, or sell investment property right now?
Where is it? What type of property is it? I would say hold on for a moment or two.
Sasolburg industrial, big commercial building.
Sell.
To place your home in your personal name or in a trust for generations to come?
In your personal name.
One line of advice to give property investors?
Understand your business, understand your risk, know what you're getting into.
Okay. Thank you so much. I appreciate the time. I know you are very busy, Eduan. Like I said, I've worked with you for a year, so I know Eduan is very busy. This is us for the episode. Please join us again where we put the facts on the table. We answer everything that you really, really want to know. Remember to like, subscribe, and follow us. If you want to reach Eduan, we will be putting all the details in our bio. So make an appointment if you have 3 or 4 or 5 properties and they're all in your personal name and you don't know what to do, company structures, the works. Thank you so much, Eduan. This is us. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Cheers.